We're back with Ed Massey. Now, you have been an attorney for decades. We're looking at recent news of the FBI arresting a judge in Wisconsin for allegedly harboring a Trinidad Aragua gang member in her home. We've already seen Democrats on the left on social media saying that this judge was arrested because she made a ruling that Trump didn't like. That's obviously a lie. That's propaganda. This judge was arrested for violating the law, allegedly. How do we get to a point where we have the individuals who are entrusted with safeguarding the Constitution, violating the law, and then expecting to get away with it?
Well, I think judges, much like a lawyer, when we take the oath for the Constitution, it's an ethical matter for us. Judges should not be activists on the bench ever. They're bound to follow the law. Charges are brought by prosecutors. Defense attorneys defend against the allegations. The judge is to abide by the rule of law and to hold the lawyers accountable and responsible for procedural requirements. And so if you just violate the law because you disagree with it in your own personal way, then that is a problem. That is a major problem.
So if you look at the law as written, what discretion does a judge have to interpret the law?
Well, there are some areas where interpretation, when a law, many times laws are written vaguely and there's a misunderstanding as to what the legislative intent was or what the Congress's intent was. In this case, there is no interpretation in that way because if a person is an illegal, they just haven't got documentation to show their residency or whatever the case may be, then the courts don't have the authority to then just set that aside. That's become a very big focus in our country about judges that are being attacked because they rule one way or the other. If the judges are ruling compliant with law and they're being attacked, that is a problem because we cannot exist with the third branch of government, which is the judicial branch, if they're not given the authority to exercise the discretion that they're bound to do under the Constitution. But when judges go rogue, and they do, and they become personally involved, it's a problem. We had a local judge years ago who died in the last year that, I thought he was a pretty good judge overall, but he went rogue on the FinFin case. And when there were millions of dollars at stake, he wound up appointing himself to a board to determine where those monies would go. Not only that, he was taking a salary for that. As a result, because he went rogue, he got disbarred, he lost his retirement, and he was removed from the bench. And so there is accountability if it's enforced. But the fact of the matter is judges cannot take the matters into their own hands, whether it be a Supreme Court justice, whether it be an appellate judge, or whether it be a local district judge. They swear to an oath to abide by the Constitution, and if they don't, then they have to be removed.
Continuing with other legal issues, we recently learned that a Maryland high school student has been informed that she cannot participate in high school graduation because she did not take a LGBTQ health class. The parents have obviously filed a lawsuit saying this goes against their religious beliefs. This student has a 4.7 weighted GPA. She's in the 96th percentile when it comes to her SAT scores. Parents say that this health class, they're calling it, spoke of gender-affirming care, other issues. Again, this is a personal issue, a religious issue. Why are the schools focusing on this instead of just generalizing mental health?
Because they've gotten outside their boundaries and they're doing things they shouldn't be doing. I mean, we are called to, the old adage when I was growing up was reading, writing, and arithmetic. The fact of the matter is schooling is about training people to become successful in the future. And that's what we always tried to practice when I was in Boone County. Career, college, or life ready. That's based on academic skills, not based on an idealism that might be put forth by a local board, a local superintendent, a teacher, etc. If this student has met the academic requirements for graduation, they absolutely should be permitted to graduate. And I think the parents will have a good case to bring and will prevail in a court of law, so long as the judge upholds the Constitution and the laws and requirements. Look, I don't care if a person is red, black, yellow, green, gay, straight, whatever the case may be. The fact of the matter is, school is not the place for that. The school is to educate and provide resources for students. Just like prayer in schools. I laugh about prayer in schools because people will say, well, our schools are failing because there's no prayer in schools. First of all, I don't think my God that I serve is limited by the four walls of a school building.
Correct.
I think they can be there. The reason people get that confused is teachers are state employees and they cannot use their classroom as a podium to proselytize for their particular belief. And so people here say, well, we want prayer in schools. Okay. Well, if you want, it's either all or nothing. If you want prayer in schools and you go out to the West Coast, you might have an area that is predominantly Muslim or predominantly Buddhist. Whose prayer is it going to be?
Right. We know. And you can see that with the local party. The Christian faith is my faith. I'm Baptist. I'm an ordained minister. However, we look back at the Constitution. If we put up the Ten Commandments at Collins Elementary, where do we put the readings from the Quran?
Right.
Where do we put Buddhist phrasing?
Most people that can
single out the Christian faith, and that is a violation of the Constitution.
Most of the people that complain about the Ten Commandments not being in our schools don't even have it.
Them.
Well, not only that, they don't even have them posted in their own home.
Right.
Most of the commandments people don't have a problem with. Thou shalt not kill. Honor your mom and dad. All those kind of things. The ones they get in trouble with are the ones about, putting God first and those kind of things. Again, if religion or faith is compelled by oppression, it's not really religion or faith at all. It should be something that a person has come to have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. That's my belief. Okay. Now, are there people that believe differently than me? Absolutely. Do I hate them? Do I threaten to kill them because they disagree with me? Absolutely not. I engage in an intelligent discourse to try to understand why they believe what they believe. But no teacher, no authority, no leader should be able to push their values or beliefs upon somebody else. That's what our Constitution fights against. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. It doesn't say Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of the Baptist religion or the Catholic religion or the Muslim religion. It says Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. That's why we are not, people talk about us being a Christian nation. We are a nation of people, many of whom are Christians.
Correct.
And so you have to really look at that from a global context, not from an isolated, idealistic point of view.
We've learned that Epstein accuser Virginia Giuffre has passed from suicide at the age of 41. Now, this is the woman who accused Jeffrey Epstein, a convicted sex trafficker, and Prince Andrew of raping her at a younger age. Epstein also committed suicide, but this Virginia Giuffre predicted her own death, said she had days to live just a few weeks ago. Do you find this mysterious? Do you think it was her way of getting out of the tragic situation? What do you think the fallout is from her death?
Look, I don't know what's in people's minds. I mean, the Bible tells us that as a person is in their heart, so are they. I don't know what was in her mind or in her heart or what she went through. I don't know really what happened to her. I don't know if her allegations were legitimate or not. I don't know with regards to Epstein, with all of that. He was found guilty in a court of law and then subsequently allegedly committed suicide. I don't know what really went on with all of that. What I think is I wish our people would spend less time focusing on these very almost entertaining stories and really get to the core concept is how do we operate as a society? Where are our mental health needs? There's a judge locally that I really like, and he taught me this in a mediation. He said there's two types of people: those getting mental health treatment and those who need it. The fact is, none of us are perfect. And so this will go on. It'll be on Entertainment Tonight. It'll be on Extra. It'll be on the news channels. It'll be debated by the talking heads. But the fact of the matter is, what do we really know about the situation? It's just like football. There are so many armchair or judges, just like there's armchair quarterbacks. And, not that I don't take it seriously. I just think that that's something that our focus should not be on.
Do you think the full list will ever come out when it comes to this, the flight logs for his Epstein's plane? Do you have an opinion on why that list hasn't been released yet?
I'm very frustrated that we're told it's going to be released and then it's not. I just hate being told that something's going to happen and then there's all this bureaucratic red tape that ties it up. The fact of the matter is we should be a transparent people. I understand that there's national security interest and all of that. We got to protect it. If what he did was true, it's crimes. If there were people involved in that, it could be criminal. So why should it not come out in public? Everything else does.
I agree. Let's talk about the border for a minute. If you remember President Trump's first term in office, we first really started dealing with the immigration issue, border control, and I distinctly remember the president President Trump gave Congress 6 months to come up with a comprehensive border plan to avoid deporting, the younger generation. They failed to fix the border. It was Congress who abdicated their duty. The president asked them to do it, and they failed. In the view of many Americans, they failed to do this because if they were to fix the border crisis, they'd have nothing to campaign on. They'd have nothing to voice concern about to the Republican Party. Why do we still not have comprehensive legislation for the border?
I think there's a lot of truth in the fact that people either withhold argument or they make argument in light of political purpose and trying to be reelected. The fact of the matter is that we are a nation made up of many different peoples. When we escaped from England and we all came together to this country, it was a melting pot. That's what we're referred to as a melting pot of people, whether it be from European descent, Caribbean descent, African descent, whatever the case may be. The fact of the matter is this: our people that are in our country should be here legally. I don't have any issue with that at all. My concern is if I were in another country and I didn't have the privilege of being born in America, and my family was under duress and I couldn't provide for them and they were at risk of being killed by drug cartels or drug lords or whatever, why would I not want to seek to have a better life for my family? Now, that being said, there's an appropriate way and there's an inappropriate way. But I think that the way the Republicans and Democrats are battling on the border has very little empathy for people and is more about putting the line in the sand or the stake in the ground for that I'm right and you're wrong. And I detest that. I think that we need to provide security for our country. Not every person that has entered America illegally is a murderer, is a convict, or a drug dealer. There are many that are just people trying to seek a better life for their families. And so the problem is we always paint the picture with one brush that all people are on the same levels. And I think that's one of the things that the Pope, who recently passed, had some disagreements with the administration because he believed it's from a world perspective as opposed to just an American perspective. I think that we have not only a duty to be good patriots and good Americans, but I think civilly and as Christians in our society, we have a duty to all people to try to extol love and compassion and empathy. So I think that the border is an issue that has to be dealt with, must absolutely be dealt with by Congress. It really sickens me that people use that as a banter for political purpose. I think we need to protect our people in America. I think we need to deal with the drug cartels. I think we need to deal with any kind of a murder The deportation stuff. I struggle with some of that only because the one gentleman from El Salvador that was sent back and the Trump administration, I think, said they made a mistake. Well, if they made a mistake, there's an argument to be made that if he wasn't a legal resident, he doesn't have due process rights. But the fact of the matter is, going to our Constitution, all men are created equal. And if we're going to follow the Constitution and provide rights for people, it doesn't say all Americans solely. It says all men, which means all people. I'm struggling with all of this rhetoric that's being spewed around just to try to say gotcha to the other side.
There was a movie that the late actor Robin Williams was in where he ran for president. One of the lines he used in that movie was, you leave the country for vacation, you got to wait 4 hours in line at customs and show 84 documents to get back in. Meanwhile, at the Mexican border, you can just walk right in, no questions asked. Every president since Clinton has talked about the border crisis. Clinton himself even used the line, "Make America Great Again," many, many times on the campaign stump. Is it just the fact that President Trump is the one trying to push border security? Is that why we have the political disagreement?
No, I don't think that's the sole reason by any stretch. I think that as I've been in Boone County, the population has extremely increased. The makeup of our communities have changed. Boone County at one time when I was on the board had 56 different languages. I think they have upwards of some 83 different languages now.
Right.
I think our country's growing. The population has exploded. People want to be in America. Why wouldn't you want to be in America? I mean, that's one thing I struggle with about the phrase "Make America Great Again." I think America's always been great.
Right.
I don't think we have to make it great again. Can we improve? Absolutely. Can we always improve in everything we do? Absolutely. Do I think we're on track for destruction because of a political party that had a limited amount of time in office? No. I think that we've stepped away from morals. We've stepped away from ethics. We've stepped away from compassion, from empathy, and just love of one another and love of mankind. Just example is in schools. Right now, the kids are running the schools. The teachers are afraid because they have no control over some of the kids. When I was a kid, my dad told me, if you get in trouble in school, when you get home, you're going to get it again. I don't care if it's your fault or not.
Right.
Now, if a kid is in school and complains to the parent is on the doorstep with a lawyer wanting to sue the school district.
Right.
We've somehow lost our way. And I don't think that's pinned on any particular administration or any particular person. So I think that we all have to, again, come together, how men and women in Congress that are adults, civilized society, can have a civil discourse about the best resolution to resolve the border policy is beyond me. It just amazes me that people, it's about either being reelected, maintaining my position. And it's just frustrating. I think it's frustrating to the American people. And I think that's why we're seeing the apathy that we have in America.
Let's talk about that for a minute. Let's talk about the struggle to get reelected when it comes to politics. Several reasons somebody wants to be elected.
Sure.
And let's focus on the negative reasons. We're looking at pensions after you've been in office a certain amount of time, taxpayer-funded pensions. We're looking at taxpayer-funded health care. We're looking at, once you've been in public office, it's very easy to get a high salary position on a company's board. Even if you've been a local level elected official, it's fairly easy to get yourself into a comfy job after that. Would you support ending legislative pensions, and would you be in support of term limits for all elected office?
Well, I wouldn't say I would be in favor of term limits for all elected office because I believe terms are decided at the polls. If a person's doing a really good job, I don't think they should just be cast to the curb because their time is up. When I was in the school board world, there were a few states that had term limits on board members. Well, again, consistency over time can be a good thing. It can also be a bad thing. I don't think that elected officials should get any benefit over other people. I think they should be getting health insurance while you're serving in office, I think that's appropriate, just like you're working a job. Paying into a pension while you're in office, that's a different thing. And if you're going to get that pension and it's going to continue to grow when you leave office, that's fine. I do wonder how somebody that makes less than $200,000 a year, that's been a career politician, becomes a multi-millionaire without some insider trading, some things like that going on. And I think that is problematic. I do think that's problematic in our society. Being a politician was not, when you Google me now, it'll say politician. That's not my identity. My identity I want to be is first as Christian, second a husband, thirdly a lawyer, and then everything else falls in its place. When I lost the election, it wasn't the end of the world because it's not my identity.
Right.
That was something that I enjoyed serving. I believe I was pretty good at it when I did serve, but it wasn't my identity. There are some people that running for office is their identity.
Right.
And when they lose that office, it's like they've lost everything. I've seen people too that they would go to Frankfurt or go to Washington and lose their family because of inappropriate relationships with other people. To me, if I had gone to Frankfurt and lost my relationship with my wife or my family, that would have, no matter how successful I was as a legislator, that'd be a complete loss to me morally. So I just think that we've got to really reevaluate what our principles are. The president now, President Trump, is talking about wanting to run for another term. I have a problem with that because right now, until the Constitution is amended, we're fixed at 2 terms. Now, if we can amend the Constitution by the vote of the American people, to me, that's different. But I think there's a reason we have those checks and balances. George Washington could have become a king, but he didn't want to because he thought that was not in the best interest of our society. I think that's still the case today. And I was in Frankfurt. I love to say this because it's important to me. I go down the hallway and I would see all these legislators from decades past. And most of them, I had no clue who they were, unless they were somebody that stood out as somebody that had big notoriety. At their time, in their day, they were all deciding important pieces of legislation. Now, time's passed, nobody has an idea who they are. 100 years from now, nobody's going to remember who I was, except for maybe my immediate family or descendants of my immediate family. So my goal when I was in office was to do the best job I could while I was serving in that seat, and I took it very seriously. And it wasn't just about getting reelected. I always said, and I stand by this, if I have to sacrifice my values, my morals, or my beliefs to be in public office, then I don't need to be in public office. So I just think we have to have people that run for the right reasons with the right attitudes and not play this gotcha game of, the other side's a demon because they don't agree with what I say.
If we could, before we wrap up here, I want to hit on a topic that is on the front page of the newspaper nearly every day, especially around here, the Cincinnati Enquirer, Kentucky Enquirer. It's always in the newspaper. What limited news is in those print pieces anymore. It's the transgender issue. And I've had several discussions with folks on this. We have a guest coming on in the near future to focus solely on this topic. I personally believe that the age of consent for any type of surgery or puberty-blocking drugs should be 18. You can make an argument that with parental consent, it would be okay, but I ask you simple questions like, a parent can't consent to allowing their 16-year-old child to drink alcohol. A parent can't consent to allowing their 14-year-old son to smoke cigarettes. If you give these items to your children, you're going to go to jail. So why the hell should it be any different to allow a 14-year-old to have an operation to physically change what they're calling their gender? And now they want to make an argument, some of these folks, that there's a difference between gender and sex, and that's fine. Again, I'm not going to be negative against anybody. I have several people of that orientation in my close friend group. I've officiated same-sex marriages. I've officiated transgender marriages. I am accepting of every single human being on this planet. That is not my issue. However, it feels to me like we're throwing 5 decades of science and common sense out the window, and we are allowing these minor children to make life-altering decisions before they can properly gauge what the consequences are.
Well, I think that's exactly correct. You know, as a Christian, I believe that God made man male and female, period. Right. Okay. Now, that being said, I know there's things that happen that are beyond my comprehension, that are beyond even the medical field's comprehension. I think you have to have some kind of a cutoff. You know, I think it's ridiculous that we have this debate about that males can participate in women's sports and all of that. I think that's crazy. I think it's distracting us from important issues. Not saying that people aren't important. I'm just thinking it's distracting us. You know, my job is not to judge, like I said before. I think there are some parents that when their child exhibits behaviors that are not in alignment with their own, they're trying to live through the eyes of the world through their child. And so they feel compelled to make this change or that change. Or, you know, I think there's people that are gay that have struggled with that their entire life, and they've tried to live one way to please parents, but privately they're living another way. I don't know what that's like. I don't pretend to know what it's like, but I think that the problem is that we get so caught up in the identity of who someone is or isn't. I think you're right. If we're going to set boundaries with adults, then we need to have an age. I think in many ways, those gender mutilation surgeries could be child abuse.
Correct.
And so I think you're right. Now, I have seen a couple of scenarios where parents, along with medical professionals, have had to decide what was in the best interest of the child as to whether or not they are a suicide risk, et cetera. That's beyond my abilities. That's beyond my comprehension, much like abortion, going back to that issue. There are certain circumstances where the life of the mother is at stake or something like that. And I think that decision has to be made between the individuals, their treating doctors, their pastors, et cetera. You know, I had a pastor once tell me that he said he knew somebody that was in the Catholic Church that they had several children, and they were told, if you carry this baby to term, you're probably not going to survive. And so, you know, but if you have a termination of the pregnancy, you might be kicked out of the church, et cetera. The pastor looked at me and said, how do you tell a mom that I'm not going to be able to be here to take care of these other 6 children because I allowed the pregnancy to go to term? I can't imagine that decision. And to me, it's not my decision to make. That's a decision between the individual, their God, their pastor, their family, their immediate circle. I think we've become too public with all of this stuff.
Right.
And I think that we have to give some discretion to our faith, to our medical professionals, and to certainly the best interest of the person being affected. You know, I don't know where we went sideways with all this stuff about gender identity and cross-dressing and all this kind of stuff. You know, I think a lot of it is just, again, it becomes an entertainment focus, like
right,
RuPaul's.
Because it's not new. It's existed forever.
I mean, in the Bible, it talks about when Lot was, you know, the people came to his door and they wanted him to send his child out to have relations with them. I mean, this kind of stuff has gone on during all of mankind.
Right.
We're no different today than in times past. But we have to deal with it with reason, with science, with faith, and all those components. It's not my way or the highway. But I do think there has to be a cutoff because these children have rights too. If you're gonna be pro-life, then you also at the same time have to be mindful that these children should not be burdened by improper decisions of their parents.
Right.
I think the same goes with capital punishment, believe it or not. How can you be pro-life and then be for capital punishment? You know, there's just a lot of different factors, and I think we need to have that civil discourse to come to an appropriate response to these difficult situations in our lives and our communities.
So, do you think the the issue of the operations, the surgeries, in the same case as abortion, should be left up to the states to decide?
I think that, that's basically what the current law is. I do think that we talk as Republicans, we talk a lot about local control. But then if it disagrees with something we believe in, we don't want to have local control. I think that local control, just like school boards, people complain about education. But who knows better in that community than that local board on how to govern in that community? I think that we have to defer to states. I think government is involved in a lot of things it should not be in, whether that be federal government or that be state government. I think a lot of it has to go back to the core family, the core community. And so, to me, I just think that every human being has rights and responsibilities and, whatnot. And I think that we've started dealing with people's lives from a political perspective and not a rational faith perspective.
All right, we're back with Attorney Ed Massey, former state representative. Let's talk, to finish up here, if you will, about the shift in funding for the Department of Education under President Trump and Secretary Linda McMahon. A lot of folks are learning that they're going to have to start paying their student loan debt. What can you tell us about the shift in funding and the future of the Education Department?
Well, I think there's a lot of things that I could say about this because of my experience in education for over 30 years. The first would be that we're not totally defunding education because a lot of this is just being shifted to other departments of government. I'll be the first to tell you that there's a lot of red tape, there's a lot of inefficiency in government, whether it be federal or state, that needs to be cleaned up. When we were in Boone County, we used a company called APQC, which was the American Production Quality Control Group, to go through and analyze everything we did and try to clean out waste. And I think that's a good thing that should happen annually. That being said, there are certain things that are provided by federal government that I think the states would not appropriately apply, such as special needs children, people with disabilities. In a lot of countries, if you have a disability, you're not even considered part of the public education system. But in America, we choose to educate all children, all races, et cetera, because children, they don't choose who they're born to. They don't choose their zip code. They're just born. Some are born into poverty. Some are born into wealth. Some are born to very affluent communities. Some are born in Appalachia. Some are born with one parent. Some are born with two, et cetera. So these kids, they're just trying to get a jump on life. And like I said before, they're our most valuable natural resource. So I think that there are certain kids, especially those with disabilities, that if you deferred it all to the states, those kids would be forgotten and cast to the side. And I think from IDEA, which was the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act that was passed in 1973, it's incumbent upon us as a nation to provide for these students and provide resources where appropriate. And I think a kid with disabilities could also be classified as a kid with specialties, like a kid that's a gifted student. Should they not be given additional resources to explore their gifts? So I think the federal government has to have some oversight in that capacity. So, my frustration is there's been all this talk about we need to privatize education. Let's be honest. If we're going to privatize education, it's an opportunity for a few people to make a whole lot of money. I've represented a couple of cases in Ohio where charter schools went out of business and the kids had to go back to public school. The parents lost the money, but somebody got rich. In this case, there's a lot of privatizing of education. It's an opportunity for a lot of people to make a lot of money that's not held to the same standards. And so I think we have to, find a balance. Again, I'm not against public or I'm not against private or charter schools, but we have a need to protect our public schools because some kids are not going to be able to make up the difference and pay the tuition that's required of a private school. And it's not their fault. It's just by virtue of who they were born to or where they were born. And so I think we've got to work together to overcome those obstacles. I do think that there's much more political fanfare about the elimination of the Department of Education than there is actual elimination because it's being shifted to other departments of government. As far as student loans, my issue is less about whether somebody should repay the student loans than about the universities that are giving student loans, promising these students that they're going to have a career and future when, my personal experience, I had a daughter that went to school, and a very well-known school, and it was $60,000 for 1 year for postgraduate study. But when she graduated, in my heart, she was saddled with this debt, and they did nothing to help place her. So it was all about, again, padding the pockets of a select few or people. And so these kids are being saddled with this debt, with promises that are being made that are unrealistic. So I'm not just for, maybe what we do instead of forgiving debt is we do what we did in the old days, like with teachers. If we need teachers in certain areas, we can't get them to go there. Maybe they get forgiveness if they go work in those not so affluent areas, like we've done with doctors. Maybe we do some kind of community service in return for them having some of their loans forgiven. But there needs to be a responsibility here. If people incur debt, they need to pay debt. That's the problem is there's a mismanagement among our country. Most states, we have to balance our budget, right? The federal government doesn't. They just print more money.
Right.
And that's a problem because, we are continuing to accrue debt at an enormous rate. And I think we need to get back to being fiscally responsible. And I think that's what a true conservative Republican is about.
Correct.
And so I think we've learned a lot. We can apply these things. We can have these discussions, and we can do better. Can the Department of Education do better? Absolutely. Can we cut out red tape and save some money? Absolutely.
I also don't think we need 8,000 employees at the Department of Education to dole out the money.
Well, to give you an example, and even our local schools, Boone County at one time was and it is still the third largest district in the state. We had half of the administrative personnel that our neighboring Kenton County had.
Right.
And yet we were being very effective. So it really comes down to a philosophy of how you can manage and give the best bang for your buck. And we owe that to the taxpayers.
Another thing is, which we've gotten better at over time, especially since I was in high school, grade school. Not every person needs a college degree.
Yeah.
You can be in trades. You can be a welder. If you're going to be an attorney, a doctor, you need a degree.
Yeah.
But you don't need a $80,000 education to be a truck driver, which is a necessary, vital role for our economy.
Well, I always say, if you want your car fixed, don't come to me. I'm not mechanically inclined. Okay? You want to sue somebody, you feel like your rights are being violated, then I can help you. Does that make my job any more important than the mechanic? Absolutely not.
Right.
Because if I can't get to court because my car's broken down, I have to go to somebody that knows what the heck they're doing.
Right.
And I go to a mechanic. If my plumbing breaks, okay, plumbers make very good money. Okay. Do they need to have a formal education like I had? No. They have a vocational education. They're making very good money. They're trained in what they do. That's why the mantra of Boone County when I was there was be college, career, or life ready.
Right.
And so those are the skills that we need. We need to get away from this idea that everybody has to have this certain degree of education. I mean, let's be honest. We have universities that are still fighting for dollars, right? And the way they make those dollars is the enrollment. And so they want everybody to be under that mantra that everybody needs this. But to be reality is, even there were days past, you didn't go to law school to be a lawyer. You trained under somebody else, like President Lincoln. Thank God we're better trained than we used to be. But I think you hit the nail on the head that we need to find what the core skills of these people are and then capitalize on that. We need good plumbers. We need good electricians. We need good mechanics. We need lawyers. We need doctors. And so all of those should be opportunities for young people today.
I feel really bad for the folks, and I know many people facing this issue. They went to college for 4 years or they went for 7 years. They've got a bachelor's degree, a master's degree. It may not be that they're a doctor or an attorney, but they have all of this debt for their education, and the only job they can get is making $15 to $18 an hour, and they can't even afford a one-bedroom apartment. How do we justify that? How do we justify the idea that wages have not kept up with inflation, and especially in our community, you can't afford rent based on your salary?
Yeah, it's a problem I'm not sure how to overcome, in the sense that as a business owner, I know that if there was a mandatory minimum, depending on what it was, it might impact the ability for me to do my work. Because, granted, most lawyers, people think we all are filthy rich. Now, I make a good living, and God has blessed me richly. But very few lawyers make the millions that people perceive we all make. That's a select few that hit a big case, or whatever the case may be. We work just like everybody else. Doctors are paid very well, but then they pay a very high premium for malpractice insurance. So the problem is, how do we reach that balance? I think that's where leadership in the community is essential. Like Gary Moore talking about Boone County, we have to have affordable housing in Boone County. We've got a lot of development in Boone County. Amazon's come here, DHL's here, and there are going to be people that come and do those jobs, but they need housing. And so there has to be that work between leadership of the companies and the leadership of the community to build an effective platform. Because if people can't find good housing, they're not going to come. And if the manufacturers can't find employees, they're going to relocate. And so, again, it's really a matter of us all working together to solve those problems.
I want to finish up here with attorney and former state representative Ed Massey, talking a little bit about family, your childhood, but the number one thing we want to hit here is 4 months after I was born, 37 years ago, you married Anita. Tell
Correct.
us about your wife.
So the funny thing about that is we started dating when we were 15. I went to Lloyd High School. She went to Scott High School. We met at church. Initially, she hated me. I would like to think I wooed her over, but we started talking, developed a discourse, became very engaged with one another, loved one another deeply. Got married after our junior year in college. We lived at the Baptist Student Union. We were janitors. In return for taking care of the building, we got our apartment. We moved up here. She worked at a bank. I went to law school. I graduated. We started a family. We have 3 beautiful daughters, 2 of whom are married, and the third who is getting married in June. We have 2 lovely grandchildren. We are very family oriented. Her dad and my dad were close friends and deacons in the same church. It was the true essence of community and love within the family. I've been married to her now almost 37 years. I wouldn't have it any other way. She's my best friend. She's the love of my life. She's an exceptionally good mother. Most people couldn't do this, but she actually works at the office. She's the financial bookkeeper for our firm. And she jokingly said to me and one of my law partners one day, "If I die, you 2 are screwed." And I think she's right. I mean, I'm a good lawyer, but finances haven't been my bailiwick. I mean, as far as day-to-day operations. And so, we've just had that teamwork component. And we've been fortunate because after our second child was born, she was able to stay home with our children. And as a result, our children are doing exceptionally well. Not all kids have those opportunities. My job is to try to see that everybody gets good opportunities. So our family, I lost my dad March 7th. He was my best friend. We did everything together. I'm as close to my mom as I was my dad. I'm now taking care of her. I was grateful that I had him for 83 years or 57 years of my life. And I think that our communities, our world would be better if we get back to the family component. I think a lot of our problems in our society has been the dissolution or the destruction of the family component. People give up on marriage so easy today. I do domestic work, and if I can try to bring people together, I do. But people today get married with the idea that if it doesn't work out, I'll just get a divorce. And so we have people that have 4, 5, 6 marriages. Back in other generations, there was a commitment. It was a lifelong commitment. I'm grateful for that. So the 2 most important things in my life are my faith in Jesus Christ. That is the most important thing to me. And then the second thing is my family, because that is really the core essence of who I am and who I need to be. They weren't really my family wasn't fond of me being in politics. And the reason they weren't fond of it is the nastiness. They would get questioned or queried. And when somebody puts out an ad about you having an Ashley Madison website, Certainly that was very offensive to my daughters, very offensive to my wife. They understood why I did it, and they supported me when I did it. But that was a big component of why they don't really care for me being in politics. They've always been very supportive of my career as a lawyer. They don't want to do what I do because it requires a lot of work. And the old saying is, law is a jealous mistress, which basically means that you have to spend a lot of hours in the office to be successful at what you do. But my wife is an amazing person. My daughters are amazing people, and my grandchildren, I can't even speak enough about them. They just they melt my heart every time that I see them. So being an American has been great. Being in Kentucky has been great. You know, my dad's from Eastern Kentucky, from Clay County. My mother's from Mount Sterling and Montgomery County. They met at Sue Bennett College, which doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
You know, my grandfather, who is now deceased, obviously, he sold one of his 4 mules to pay for my dad's college at Sue Bennett. And so that's where he met my mother. And then my dad sold his cow to buy my mother's engagement ring. Okay.
Wow.
Just a different time that we were.
Right.
They moved to Northern Kentucky after going to Eastern Kentucky University because my dad did not want to be in the coal mining industry. And they moved up here to get jobs as educators. Right. And that's how I became cemented in Northern Kentucky. Right. And so, you know, I can't speak enough about the family component and the support that I received throughout my entire life. I'm grateful to have not only been in that family, but to have been in Northern Kentucky, because it's been such a wonderful experience for me personally. I just hope that I can give back to the community. And that's my sense of public service that I've exhibited. One thing we didn't talk about that's kind of funny is before I became a school board member, for many years I was an EMT firefighter for Crescent Springs Villa Fire Authority and for Florence. So I've always been in the community eye. And that's okay with me because I believe we have to help one another. We're all better together.
Right. I would agree with that. We've had a very long discussion, great topics discussed. Hope to have you on again, obviously, as news happens and things happen in the state. I always want to give the guests the last word, if you would. You talk a lot about your father. To close out, would you tell us maybe a favorite memory or a favorite time with him to close us out?
Well, I have many, many memories of things with my dad. We hunted together. We fished together. You know, one of the stories that I always tell that people find amusing and it's fun, and so I'll share that, is that my dad was very oriented towards animals, loved animals. A rooster showed up in his yard one day here in Erlanger, Kentucky. And he picked that thing up and would pet it and feed it and whatever. And wasn't long that rooster just was there all the time. But he started chasing kids after school because they would torment him. And so he would chase the kids. So he got arrested by animal control and taken to the local pound, if you will. Dad found out about it. He went and bailed him out. The funny thing is they were scared of the rooster. Dad wasn't scared at all. They asked him, "How are you going to take him home?" He said, "I'm going to put him in my truck." And he threw him in the front seat of the truck, and they drove back to Erlanger. Well, long story short, there was an ordinance that was being sought to ban all fowl or roosters from Erlanger, Kentucky. And we had this monstrous council meeting up here at the city building, and about, his name was Cocky, about Cocky the rooster and whether he should be returned to the community. So, you know, my dad got up and talked and testified, and ultimately the rooster got banished from Erlanger, but he became a resident of Boone County.
There you go.
And so he lived out close to me on a lot my dad has, and it became a love-hate relationship because my dad had to patrol his lot with a tobacco stick, because if he turned his back, that rooster would flog him. He got a little agitated in his older age. And the funny thing about that is it actually appeared in the USA Today in the newspaper. But I think about it, my dad just got the biggest kick out of all of that. He, one of the news reporters here locally came out to do a story. He said, people love stories on animals. He said, "Where is that rooster?" My dad pointed to him. He said, "Well, go over there and talk to him." Well, my dad knew exactly what would happen, and that rooster went after the reporter. Another story real quick with that was that my daughter went over to get some tables for her graduation with her boyfriend, and they didn't come back, and I didn't know what happened, so I went over to check on them. Well, the boyfriend was in the back of the truck. My daughter was in the cab of the truck, and the rooster was circling the truck like a protective rooster. And I'm like, that's the kind of authority that I need.
That's it.
So that's just one of many stories about my dad. He was, he died of glioblastoma. I'm grateful 2 years ago I had a near-death experience with a 95% blockage in the widowmaker of my heart. I survived. I believe God had a purpose for that. I also believe when I lost the election, as much as I hated to lose, and I loved serving in Frankfurt, had I won the election, I would have had a difficult time because my dad became ill on December the 28th of 2024, and he passed away on March 7th of 2025. So I needed to be there for my dad.
Right.
And that was much more important to me than any legislation that I could have been involved in. I hope to carry on his legacy, hope to carry on his memory, take care of my mom, and I hope that something that we've done in our family will exhibit itself through the lives of my children and grandchildren. So I just love life, and I love the opportunity to help my fellow Americans.
If somebody wants to reach out to you, maybe it's not for legal work, maybe it's just a discussion, maybe something to do with politics, how can they reach you?
My cell phone number is 859-743-0318. I've given it to everybody. In fact, it was on my business card for many years. And my email is cedmassey@nkYlawyers.com. Our website for the firm is nkYlawyers.com.
Thanks, Ed. Hope to do it again.
Thank you.